The Galactic Confederation had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. 17 elder species controlled hundreds of worlds across the Orion Arm. They had seen civilizations rise and fall. They had watched young species crawl out of their birth worlds and take their first steps into the void. They considered themselves wise. They considered themselves powerful. They believed nothing in the universe could surprise them anymore. They were wrong. In the year 2287 by Earth's calendar, a small vessel emerged from faster-than-light travel near the edge of Confederation space. The ship was called the Horizon, and it carried 300 humans on a mission of peaceful exploration. Admiral Jack Morrison stood on the bridge and looked at the stars through the main viewport. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes. He had spent 40 years in service to humanity's space program. This was supposed to be his final mission before retirement. He wanted it to be a good one. Commander Lisa Grant stood beside him. She was younger, with sharp features and a quick mind. She served as the ship's tactical officer, though she hoped there would be no need for tactics on this journey. Behind them, Dr. Nathan Cole studied the sensor readings with growing excitement. He was the chief science officer, a man who had dreamed of finding alien life since he was a child. The Confederation detected the Horizon within hours. Long-range scanners identified the vessel's origin point as a small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The star was called Sol by its inhabitants. The third planet from that star was called Earth, and the creatures who lived there called themselves humans. The High Council convened in the Great Chamber on the Confederation's capital world. Representatives from all 17 elder species gathered to discuss these newcomers. The chamber was vast, built to accommodate beings of all sizes and shapes. Some delegates floated in anti-gravity fields. Others sat on specialized platforms. A few existed as pure energy and simply projected their presence into the room. Ambassador Kethral of the Velcorii Empire demanded to speak first. The Velcorii were reptilian creatures, tall and powerful, with scales the color of dried blood. They had built their empire through conquest and maintained it through fear. Kethral looked at the holographic image of the human vessel with obvious contempt. He spoke in a voice like stones grinding together. He told the council that these humans were weak. He said they came from a single world and possessed primitive technology. He noted that their entire population numbered only 11 billion. The Velcorii Empire alone controlled 300 billion souls across 40 worlds. What threat could these soft creatures possibly pose? Elder Morath of the Crystalline Beings raised an objection. His species was ancient beyond measure. They had observed the universe for longer than most civilizations had existed. Morath's body was made of living crystal that shifted colors as he spoke. He told the council that his people had watched Earth for centuries. He said the humans possessed unusual characteristics that warranted caution. Kethral dismissed the warning with a wave of his clawed hand. He said the crystalline beings had grown timid with age. He proposed that the Velcorii claim human territory before these newcomers could spread beyond their home system. The council could divide the spoils afterward. It would be quick and clean and profitable. Several other species voiced their support. The humans had resources worth taking. Their world was rich in water and metals. Their system contained gas giants perfect for fuel harvesting, and the humans themselves could serve as laborers in Velcorii mines. It was simply good business. Morath tried once more to counsel patience. He spoke of his species' observations. He described how humans had survived ice ages and plagues and wars among themselves. He explained that their planet was unusually hostile, filled with predators and disasters that had shaped the human species into something resilient. He warned that creatures forged in such a crucible should not be underestimated. But the council had already made its decision. The vote passed with 12 species in favor, 4 abstaining, and only the crystalline beings opposed. The Velcorii would handle the subjugation of humanity. The other species would receive their share of the profits. Within 3 standard cycles, a Velcorii war fleet of 200 vessels departed for the Sol system. Fleet Commander Vorath led the expedition personally. He was a veteran of 11 successful conquests. He had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He expected this mission to be the easiest of his career. He told his officers they would be home within a month. On Earth, The first warning came from the horizon. Admiral Morrison had made contact with a Confederation trading vessel and learned of the approaching fleet. He sent an emergency transmission to Earth immediately. The message traveled faster than light, but still took hours to arrive. When it did, it changed everything. Secretary of Defense Amy Patterson received the transmission in her office in Washington. She read it 3 times to make sure she understood. An alien empire was sending 200 warships to conquer Earth. They would arrive in less than 2 weeks. Humanity had never faced anything like this before. Patterson did not panic. She had served in 3 wars during her career. She knew that fear was useless, unless it drove action. She contacted every major government on Earth within the hour. She shared the intelligence and called for an emergency session of the United Nations. President Scott Adams addressed the world the next morning. He stood before cameras and spoke plainly. He told humanity that they were not alone in the universe. He explained that an alien fleet was coming to enslave them. He said that Earth would not surrender. He asked every nation to set aside their differences and stand together. It was the only way they would survive. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Old enemies became allies overnight. Resources flowed across borders without hesitation. Factories that had been producing consumer goods switched to military production. Scientists shared their research openly. Soldiers from every nation volunteered for a unified defense force. Admiral Derek Hayes took command of Earth's home fleet. It was a collection of vessels that had never been designed for war. Exploration ships, mining vessels, transport craft. Hayes looked at what he had to work with and started making plans. He was a practical man. He knew the odds were against them, but he also knew that humanity had faced impossible odds before. On Luna Station, Commander Kate Sullivan coordinated the defense grid. She worked without sleep for days, positioning weapons platforms and establishing communication networks. Her teams installed new systems faster than anyone thought possible. When someone asked her how she kept going, she simply said that sleeping would have to wait until the fighting was over. The Valkyrie fleet drew closer each day. Their commanders reviewed their battle plans and anticipated an easy victory. They had no idea what was waiting for them. They did not understand what humans were capable of when their survival was threatened. They were about to learn. The gathering storm was about to break, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Valkyrie fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system on a cold Tuesday morning. 200 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation. Their hulls gleamed with weapon ports and armor plating. Each vessel was built for one purpose, and one purpose only: destruction. Fleet Commander Vorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominator. He was the largest Valkyrie in the fleet, nearly 3 meters tall, with scales scarred from decades of combat. He looked at the distant blue dot that was Earth and felt nothing but contempt. His sensors showed him the human defense fleet. It was smaller than he expected, fewer than 70 vessels, most of them clearly not designed for warfare. Vorath opened a communication channel to the humans. He gave them one chance to surrender. He told them that resistance was pointless. He promised that those who submitted would be treated as valuable property. Those who fought would be destroyed. He gave them 1 hour to respond. Admiral Derek Hayes received the message on the bridge of the carrier Liberty. He was surrounded by his command staff, men and women who had trained their entire lives for a moment they hoped would never come. Hayes listened to the alien commander's demands. Then he sent his reply. He told Vorath that Earth would not surrender. He said that humanity had not crawled out of caves and crossed oceans and reached for the stars just to kneel before the first bully that came along. He invited the Valkyrie to come and try to take what they wanted. He promised they would regret it. Vorath was amused by the response. He had heard similar defiance from other species before their worlds burned. He ordered his fleet to advance. The battle began at 1400 hours Earth time. Valkyrie weapons lit up the darkness of space with beams of concentrated energy. Human ships scattered and regrouped, following patterns they had practiced for days. Commander Lisa Grant had developed the defensive tactics based on old naval warfare from Earth's history. The humans could not match the aliens in firepower, so they would have to outthink them instead. The first hours were brutal. Human vessels fell one after another. The carrier Resolute took a direct hit and broke apart. The destroyer, Defiance, rammed a Valkyrie cruiser to save a transport ship full of evacuees. Captain Maria Santos stayed at her post until the end, guiding her crew to escape pods while she held the enemy at bay. But the humans did not break, they did not flee. Every time the Valkyrie thought they had won a sector, human ships would reappear from unexpected angles. Small fighters dove between the massive alien warships, targeting weak points with precision strikes. Boarding parties in armored suits cut their way into enemy vessels and fought hand-to-hand in the corridors. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper flew his fighter through the chaos with 3 other pilots from his squadron. They were all that remained of a unit that had started with 16. Cooper saw a Valkyrie command ship directing the assault on Earth's orbital stations. He made a decision without hesitation. He told his wingmen to cover him and pushed his engines to maximum. His fighter was already damaged. Warning lights flashed across his console, but Cooper aimed directly at the command ship's bridge and accelerated. At the last possible moment, he triggered his ejection seat. His fighter slammed into the alien vessel at full speed. The explosion tore through multiple decks and killed the ship's commander. Cooper floated in the void, watching the enemy ship drift out of control, until a rescue shuttle picked him up 3 hours later. On Earth, the Valkyrie landing forces expected to find a population ready to submit. Instead, they found cities that had become fortresses. Every street was a potential ambush. Every building could hide defenders. Sergeant Marcus Bell led his unit through the ruins of Chicago, striking at alien patrols and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Bell was not a large man. He had grown up on a farm in Kansas and joined the military because he wanted to see the world. Now, he was fighting to save it. His unit used knowledge of the terrain that no alien map could provide. They moved through subway tunnels and sewer systems. They set traps in abandoned buildings. They made the Valkyrie pay for every block they tried to take. The aliens had never encountered resistance like this. Other species they had conquered had organized armies that could be defeated in open battle. The humans fought like something else entirely. They fought like cornered animals that had nothing left to lose. Commander Kate Sullivan coordinated the defense from Luna Station with barely any sleep. Her voice became the constant presence in every human soldier's ear. She tracked enemy movements, directed reinforcements, and refused to let anyone give up hope. When a young officer asked her if they could really win this fight, she told him that winning was the only option they had. After 72 hours of continuous combat, something remarkable happened. The Valkyrie advance stopped. Their fleet had lost 80 ships. Their ground forces had suffered casualties beyond anything they had projected. Fleet Commander Vorath was dead, killed when humans stormed his flagship in a desperate boarding action that cost 200 human lives. The surviving Valkyrie commanders held an emergency conference. They had expected a quick conquest. Instead, they had stumbled into a nightmare. The humans refused to surrender even when surrounded. They sacrificed themselves to destroy enemy positions. They used tactics that seemed insane but somehow worked. One commander reported that human soldiers had charged his position while singing battle songs from their history. Another described how a human pilot had flown directly into his ship's engine intake rather than be captured. The decision was made to retreat. The remaining Valkyrie vessels gathered their wounded and their dead and withdrew from the Sol system. They left behind the wreckage of their ambitions scattered across human space. Admiral Hayes watched them go from the battered bridge of the Liberty. His ship had taken 17 direct hits. Half his crew was dead or wounded. But they had won. Somehow, against all odds, they had won. On Earth, the news spread within minutes. People poured into the streets, weeping and embracing strangers. Church bells rang. Horns blared. Humanity had faced extinction and survived. But Admiral Hayes knew this was only the beginning. He looked at the stars where the Valkyrie had fled and understood that they would be back. And next time, humanity would need to be ready to take the fight to them. Secretary of Defense Patterson began planning the counteroffensive before the celebrations ended. The humans had learned something important in this battle. They had learned what they were capable of when everything was on the line. The galaxy had thought humanity was weak. The galaxy had been very wrong. The survivors of the Valkyrie fleet carried a warning back to Confederation space. They told everyone who would listen. They described the horror of fighting creatures who would not stop, who could not be intimidated, who seemed to grow stronger as the battle turned against them. They begged the other species to understand. The humans were not prey, they were predators who had merely been sleeping, and now they were awake. The news of the Valkyrie defeat spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Trading vessels carried the story from station to station. Diplomats whispered it in government chambers. Scientists analyzed the battle data with growing disbelief. A species that had achieved faster than light travel less than a century ago had beaten back one of the most powerful military forces in existence. The Galactic Confederation convened an emergency session. The Great Chamber was filled with nervous energy. Representatives who had voted to support the Valkyrie invasion now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had expected to divide the spoils of a conquered world. Instead, they faced the possibility that they had made a terrible enemy. Elder Morath of the Crystalline Beings did not say anything when the session began. He did not need to. His warning had been ignored. Now everyone could see the consequences. Ambassador Kethral was absent from the chamber. The Valkyrie Empire was in chaos. Their fleet had been humiliated. Their best commander was dead. Rebellions were already stirring on their conquered worlds. Species that had been crushed under Valkyrie boots for generations suddenly dared to hope. Dr. Megan Torres arrived at the Confederation capital 3 weeks after the battle. She was humanity's first official ambassador to the galactic community. She was a small woman with dark hair and steady eyes. She had been a professor of interstellar law before the war. Now she carried the voice of 11 billion humans who had almost been enslaved. Torres requested permission to address the High Council. The request was granted immediately. No one wanted to risk offending the humans further. She walked to the center of the Great Chamber and looked at the assembled representatives. Creatures of every shape and size watched her in silence. Some were curious. Some were afraid. A few were already calculating how they might profit from this new situation. Torres spoke simply and clearly. She told the council that humanity had not wanted this war. She explained that the horizon had come in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship. She described how the Valkyrie had answered that offer with a fleet of warships and a demand for surrender. Then her voice grew harder. She told the council that humanity had a message for anyone who might consider following the Valkyrie example. She said that humans remember. They do not forgive unprovoked attacks on their people, and they do not stop fighting until the threat is ended. The chamber was completely silent when she finished. Ambassador Torres walked out without waiting for a response. She had said what needed to be said. On Earth, President Scott Adams addressed the United Nations 1 month after the battle. The world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Old conflicts seemed petty now. Border disputes and trade disagreements faded into nothing compared to what humanity had just survived together. Adams announced a new era of global cooperation. Resources would be shared openly. Technology would be developed jointly. Military forces from every nation would combine into a single Earth Defense Command. Humanity would face the galaxy as one people, or not at all. The response was overwhelming. Governments that had been rivals for centuries signed partnership agreements. Scientists who had competed for funding now worked side by side. Factories across the world began producing ships and weapons at a pace that would have seemed impossible before the invasion. Captain Ben Harper oversaw construction at the new orbital shipyard above North America. He watched the first Vengeance-class battleship take shape in the vacuum. It was massive, nearly twice the size of any human vessel that had come before. Its hull bristled with weapons designed based on captured Valkyrie technology. These were not exploration ships. These were instruments of war. Harper had lost his brother in the battle over Earth. He had lost friends and colleagues, and people he had trained with for years. He looked at the new battleship and felt something cold and determined settle into his chest. He would make sure humanity was never caught unprepared again. Admiral Morrison led a different kind of mission. His ship, the rebuilt Horizon, carried a team of intelligence operatives deep into Valkyrie space. Their goal was not destruction. It was information. They needed to understand their enemy, before they could defeat them completely. Sergeant Danielle Kirk was the best infiltration specialist in the service. She could pass undetected through security systems that were supposed to be unbreakable. She could learn languages in weeks and blend into alien cultures that humans had never encountered. Morrison trusted her with the most dangerous part of the mission. Kirk and her team spent 6 months mapping Valkyrie territory. They identified military installations and supply routes. They found weaknesses in the Empire's defenses. Most importantly, they made contact with the species that the Valkyrie had conquered over the centuries. These subjugated peoples lived in fear and misery. They had been told that resistance was impossible. They had been told that the Valkyrie were invincible. Then, they heard about Earth. They heard about a young species that had fought back and won. Hope began to spread through the slave worlds like a sunrise after endless night. Kirk sent regular reports back to Earth. She described the suffering she witnessed. She described the yearning for freedom that existed on every conquered world. She recommended that humanity support these resistance movements when the time came to strike back. Elder Morath studied humanity with growing fascination and concern. He accessed his species' most ancient archives, records that stretched back millions of years. He searched for any reference to creatures like these humans. What he found disturbed him deeply. The archives contained a theoretical classification that had never been applied to any known species. It described something called an apex predator civilization. This was a species forged by an unusually hostile homeworld, hardened by evolution, and possessing an unbreakable will to survive. Such a species would be dangerous enough on its own, but the archives warned that if an apex predator species ever achieved cooperation and technology, they would become something unprecedented. Morath looked at the data from Earth. He saw a world of extreme temperatures and violent weather. He saw continents filled with predators and diseases that killed constantly. He saw a species that had survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions and disasters that would have exterminated most life forms. And he saw something else. He saw that humans had not merely survived their hostile world. They had dominated it. They had spread to every corner of their planet. They had built civilizations and developed technology and reached for the stars. They had done all this while fighting wars among themselves that killed millions. Morath understood now what the galaxy was facing. Humanity was not just another young species learning to explore space. They were apex predators who had somehow learned to work together. They had chosen peace because they preferred it. But when peace was taken from them, they became something else entirely. He sent a private message to every species in the Confederation. He warned them not to provoke the humans any further. He explained that what the galaxy had witnessed was only a taste of what humanity could become. He begged them to listen before it was too late. Some listened, others did not. And on Earth, the war machine continued to grow. The awakening was complete. And the reckoning was coming. 2 years had passed since the Valkyrie first attacked Earth. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Humanity had transformed from a curious newcomer into a force that made ancient empires tremble, and now that force was ready to move. Admiral Derek Hayes stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Battleship Retribution. Around him, over 500 human warships waited in formation. They were joined by vessels from a dozen other species, former slaves who had risen against the Valkyrie and chosen to fight alongside their human liberators. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in recorded galactic history. Hayes looked at his command staff. Commander Lisa Grant had developed the battle plans they would follow. She had studied every piece of intelligence that Sergeant Kirk's team had gathered. She knew the enemy's weaknesses better than the enemy knew them themselves. Her strategies had been named the Grant Doctrine by military historians who were already writing about this war. The doctrine was simple in principle but devastating in practice. Strike with overwhelming force at critical points. Offer surrender before each engagement. Treat those who yielded with fairness and respect. Destroy utterly those who continued to fight. Leave no enemy strong enough to threaten humanity again. Hayes gave the order to advance. The fleet entered faster than light travel and began the journey to Valkyrie space. The campaign that followed would be remembered for centuries. The humans moved with precision that terrified their enemies. Valkyrie outposts fell within hours of being attacked. Supply lines were cut before defenders knew they were in danger. Communication networks were shattered, leaving entire sectors unable to coordinate their response. Captain Laura Mitchell commanded the assault force that struck the Valkyrie Military Academy. It was a symbolic target as much as a strategic one. The academy had trained generations of officers who had conquered and enslaved countless worlds. Mitchell wanted to send a message that those days were over. Her Marines landed under heavy fire. Colonel Tyler Ross led the ground assault personally. He was a quiet man, who rarely spoke more than necessary. But his soldiers would follow him anywhere. They trusted him because he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. Ross and his unit fought through the academy building by building. The Valkyrie defenders were fierce. They knew that defeat here would mean the end of everything they had built. They fought with the desperation of creatures facing extinction, but the humans had something the Valkyrie did not understand. They had rage. Cold, patient, focused rage that had been building since the first Valkyrie warship entered the Sol system. Every human soldier carried memories of friends lost in the battle for Earth. They carried images of cities burned and families torn apart. They did not fight with hatred. They fought with absolute determination to ensure it never happened again. The academy fell after 3 days of continuous combat. Colonel Ross planted a human flag on the main building and broadcast a message across all frequencies. He told the remaining Valkyrie forces that their military academy was gone. He invited them to surrender and live in peace. He warned them that continued resistance would only bring more destruction. Some Valkyrie units surrendered, many did not. The war continued. Captain Ben Harper led the space assault on the Valkyrie homeworld. His fleet broke through the orbital defenses in a battle that lasted 18 hours. The Valkyrie threw everything they had at the human vessels. Ancient warships that had been held in reserve for centuries were launched in a final desperate defense. It was not enough. Harper's ships cut through the defenders with ruthless efficiency. By the end of the day, human vessels controlled the space above the Valkyrie capital. Marines prepared to land on the planet's surface. Ambassador Torres arrived before the final assault began. She had requested permission to attempt negotiation one more time. Admiral Hayes granted the request. He had no desire to destroy an entire civilization. If peace was possible. Torres met with General Soreth, the highest-ranking Valkyrie military officer still alive. He was old for his species. His scales faded to dull gray. His eyes tired from decades of warfare. He looked at the human ambassador and saw something he had never expected to see. He saw a species that could destroy his people completely, but was still offering them a chance to survive. Soreth asked her a question that had haunted him since the war began. He wanted to understand why humans fought the way they did. He had encountered hundreds of species in his career. None of them possessed the intensity that humans displayed. None of them refused to accept defeat with such stubborn ferocity. Torres considered the question carefully before answering. She explained that Earth was not a gentle world. Humans had evolved alongside predators that wanted to eat them. They had survived diseases that killed most of those infected. They had endured ice ages and volcanic winters and natural disasters that would have wiped out weaker species. She told Soreth that every generation of human history had known war. Humans had fought each other for territory and resources and ideas. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization. They had come close to extinction more than once, always by their own hands. But they had also learned something from all that struggle. They had learned that surrender meant death. They had learned that protecting their families sometimes required sacrificing everything. They had learned that giving up was never an option when the things they loved were threatened. Torres looked at the old general with something close to sympathy. She told him that the Valkyrie had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that because humans preferred peace, they were incapable of war. They had confused kindness with weakness. They had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. Soreth nodded slowly. He said that he understood now. The Valkyrie had not attacked a civilization. They had attacked a species of warriors who had merely chosen to set aside their nature for a time. Torres agreed. She told him that humanity had been reminded of what they truly were. And now, The galaxy would have to live with the consequences. The surrender was signed the next day. The Velkori Empire that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia ceased to exist. Their conquered worlds were freed. Their military was disbanded. Their leaders were brought before a galactic tribunal to answer for their crimes. Admiral Hayes watched the ceremonies from the bridge of the Retribution. He felt no joy at the victory. Too many good people had died to reach this moment. But he felt something else. He felt that humanity had proven itself. They had shown the galaxy what they were made of. The reckoning was complete. But the story was not over yet. A decade had passed since the fall of the Velkori Empire. The galaxy had transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible during the dark days of conquest and tyranny. Where once there had been fear and oppression, there was now something new growing among the stars. Hope. Humanity had not become conquerors. This surprised many species who had expected the victors to claim their spoils and establish dominion over the defeated. Instead, the humans had done something unprecedented. They had helped their former enemies rebuild. They had established fair trade agreements with every willing partner. They had created a new coalition based on mutual respect and shared prosperity. Admiral Jack Morrison sat on an observation deck overlooking the rebuilt Confederation headquarters. The station had been expanded to accommodate representatives from over 50 species now. Many of them were former subjects of the Velkori who had won their freedom with human help. Morrison watched ships from a dozen worlds dock at the station and felt something warm in his chest. This was what victory was supposed to look like. Elder Morath sat beside him. The ancient crystalline being had become an unlikely friend over the years. Their conversations had started as diplomatic necessity and evolved into genuine connection. Morath understood humanity better than most aliens ever would. He had studied them longer than any human civilization had existed. Morath told Morrison that his species continued to be fascinated by humans. He said that humanity could have become tyrants after winning the war. They had the military power to impose their will on the entire galaxy. No one could have stopped them. Yet they had chosen restraint instead. Morrison smiled at his friend. He explained that humans had seen where the path of conquest led. Their own history was filled with empires that had risen through force and crumbled into dust. The strong preyed on the weak until someone stronger came along. It was an endless cycle of violence that never produced lasting peace. Humans wanted something better, Morrison said. They wanted to build rather than destroy. They wanted allies rather than subjects. They wanted a galaxy where their children could grow up without fear of invasion or extinction. Morath considered these words carefully. He said that most species learned such lessons only after great suffering. Humans had suffered much in their history but had emerged with wisdom intact. It was a remarkable achievement, Morrison agreed. He said that humanity's greatest strength was not their capacity for violence, though that was considerable. Their greatest strength was their ability to choose when violence was necessary and when peace was possible. They could be terrible enemies or loyal friends. The choice belonged to those who encountered them. Across the station, Lieutenant Commander Chris Kelly conducted a training session at the Galactic Defense Academy. His students came from species that had been fighting each other for centuries. Now they sat together in the same classroom, learning to work as a team. Kelly taught them tactics and strategy, but he also taught them something more important. He taught them that strength without cooperation was meaningless. Kelly had been a young officer during the war against the Velkori. He had seen friends die and watched worlds burn. He had also seen former enemies become brothers in arms when faced with a common threat. Those experiences had shaped his approach to teaching. He believed that the galaxy needed defenders who understood both the horror of war and the value of peace. His students listened with respect. Some of them came from species that had oppressed others in the past. Some came from species that had been oppressed. Now they trained together, ate together, and learned to trust each other. The old hatreds faded a little more with each passing year. Dr. Nathan Cole had founded the Institute for Interspecies Understanding after the war. His dream of finding alien life had come true in ways he never imagined. Now he dedicated himself to helping different species communicate and cooperate. His researchers developed translation technology that broke down barriers between cultures. They studied alien psychology and biology to prevent misunderstandings that could lead to conflict. His assistant, Hannah Price, had joined the institute straight out of university. She was young and brilliant, and full of ideas that older scientists had never considered. She believed that the galaxy's diversity was its greatest resource. Every species had something unique to offer. The challenge was learning to share. Price worked on a project to create a universal educational database. It would contain the knowledge of every participating civilization, freely accessible to anyone who wanted to learn. The Valkyrii had hoarded knowledge and used it as a weapon. Humanity would do the opposite. They would give knowledge away and watch the galaxy flourish. Throughout Confederation space, monuments stood to commemorate those who had fallen in the war. Human names were carved alongside names from every species that had fought for freedom. The monuments reminded everyone of what had been sacrificed. They also reminded everyone of what had been won. And in every species' educational archives, a new entry had been added. It had been written by human historians and translated into every known language. It served as both lesson and warning. The entry described humanity in simple terms. It explained that humans were capable of extraordinary kindness and creativity and cooperation. They had offered friendship to every species willing to accept it. They preferred peace above all things. But they were also survivors of a hostile world, forged by millions of years of evolution that rewarded strength and resilience. When threatened, humans did not surrender. They did not flee. They did not negotiate from weakness. They fought with every resource at their disposal and did not stop until the threat was eliminated. The Valkyrii had learned this lesson. Their empire was now dust. The entry concluded with a recommendation. It advised every species in the galaxy to consider carefully before choosing conflict with humanity. The humans would extend their hand in friendship. They would share their knowledge and their resources. They would help those in need and defend those who could not defend themselves. But if that hand was rejected, if friendship was answered with aggression, then something else would follow. The humans would fight, and they would win. Secretary General Amanda Lewis gave the closing address at the annual commemoration of peace. She was the first human to lead the reformed Galactic Council. Her election had been unanimous, a sign of how much had changed since the dark days of the war. Lewis stood before representatives of every known spacefaring civilization. She spoke of the future that they were building together. She spoke of children who would grow up knowing only cooperation between species. She spoke of the discoveries waiting to be made and the challenges waiting to be overcome. Then she spoke of the past. She reminded everyone of what had brought them to this moment. She described the choice that had faced humanity when the Valkyrie fleet arrived in their system: surrender and live as slaves, or fight and risk extinction. Humanity had chosen to fight. They had chosen to stand for something greater than survival. They had chosen to be free. Lewis looked at the assembled delegates with calm determination. She told them that humanity would always make the same choice. They would never strike first. They would always offer peace. But if peace was rejected, if their people were threatened, if everything they loved was endangered, then they would respond with everything they had. Not out of cruelty, not out of hatred, but out of love for what they protected. That was the human way. That was their warning. That was their truth. The delegates rose in standing ovation. Every species understood the message. Every species would remember it. Never attack the humans. The galaxy had learned its lesson. And humanity had taken its place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as guardians. Not as masters, but as partners. Not as predators hunting for prey, but as protectors watching over all who chose friendship over fear. The war was over. The future was beginning. And it was a future worth fighting for.